Fantastic. All right. Hello and welcome everyone to Sales Week, our first ever Sales Week, and today's session on demystifying sales with our wonderful WGU alum, Guillermo Diaz. And my name is Ezra, and I work in our career and professional development office here at WGU. And I just have a few housekeeping items. One of those is we are recording this session, and we will send out that recording to everyone on the call so you can go back and rewatch as many times as you want. The other item too is please stay muted throughout the session. It just helps with some of those noise distractions. And then last but not least, we will have some time for Q&A at the end. You are more than welcome to add questions as you think of them in the chat. I will be monitoring that and then we'll ask them, or you can wait until the end, until that Q&A time, and go ahead and use that raise your hand feature and you can ask questions that way as well. All right, those are all of the items I had, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, Guillermo, again for joining us today. It's so good to have you with us. I am honestly really excited for this session because I think sales is such an important part of business, but I also feel like it has a bit of a bad rep. And so I'm really excited to hear your insights and hear about your experiences. So do you want to just kind of get started with an introduction and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing right now?
I am happy to. Thanks for having me. What can I tell you? My name is Guillermo Diaz. I've been in sales for a little over 30 years. I know I probably started very, very young at the age of about 10 or 12, but no, I'm a lot older than that, I promise. What can I tell you? I have been in so many different industries. Actually, I'm looking through the chat right now. There's people in Texas. There's people in North Carolina. I actually lived in both locations. Lived in South Carolina, lived in Boston, Massachusetts, lived in New York, New Jersey. So first thing off, sales takes you many places that you don't expect, I promise you. I'm currently here in Tucson, Arizona. I was with WGU back in the early 2000, actually late 2010. So I finished my degree during that time. It's never too late. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you. I graduated at the age of 40. It is definitely never too late, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I got it done, and currently finishing off my MBA. So that gives you a little bit of information. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so I do speak in 2 languages. So if you see me talking to with my hands, for the most part, it has to do with me trying to think in Spanish and speak in English. So apologize for that in advance. But yeah, what are the questions? I have tons of stuff to talk about because
Fantastic.
there's a lot of years doing stuff. So
That's awesome. Well, I love all of that. And so we'll dig in a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you maybe first got started in sales. Let's start there.
okay. Wow. Literally, I could say that I actually started at the age of 10. In Puerto Rico, I actually started selling the San Juan Star, which was a newspaper that was English only to a whole bunch of people who spoke Spanish. So needless to say, I cut my teeth in sales during that time with a paper boy for that. So at 5 in the morning at the age of 10, even though you weren't supposed to do it until you were 12, I kind of fit my way into that because I have always had this older looking face. So was able to go ahead and start working at that age, and I've been in sales in one way or another ever since. For those of you that don't know, sales spans so many different areas of our lives. If you've ever tried to go ahead and convince your significant other, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, non-titled person, whoever that is, to do something that they really didn't want to do, you are selling. I hate to break it to you. So we all have a little bit of salesman in us. We're not all used car salesmen, I promise you that. To be honest with you, where my career really started was I was actually a salesperson during Christmas for the Gap in Old Navy in Puerto Rico. I went from being a salesperson to being a manager at the Gap store in Carolina, Puerto Rico, and then ended up being the general manager of the first Old Navy store that opened in Bayamon, Puerto Rico. From there, did a couple of things here and there in training for Gap and Old Navy. That took me to the States, and in Florida, I ended up uh, one of the little hiccups in the economy that happened during the early 2000s. I ended up getting into the car business because they had a guaranteed amount of money that they gave you every month. So I said, well, for the couple of months that I'm going to be here in Orlando, I'll do that. And that turned into a 2 month stint, turned into 2 years, and being the top salesman for that company for 2 years in a row. Ended up managing there, ended up getting a job with GM, teaching people how to sell cars. And then, of course, 2008 came around, and that changed everything for everybody. For those of you not old enough to remember, that was it was the Great Recession, is what they called it. At that point, I decided that I was going to go ahead and follow a dream, which was to be a financial advisor. So got into insurance first with State Farm in the great state of Texas. And from there, ended up in a training role as well, teaching some of the new agents how to sell in life insurance. And then moved on from there and got into a role doing financial advising for school districts in the state of New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. So I've traveled between those three states. I think the last time I counted, because this job still has me traveling within Arizona, there's over 600,000 miles of seat time inside a car. And at one point or another, I was American Airlines Platinum. So there's a lot of miles traveled. COVID hit, and at that time, I had started with Merrill Lynch as a financial advisor, and unfortunately, that didn't last very long because they decided that we were all going to stay virtual. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm a little more engaging in person than I am over the phone. So I said, that's not what I'm going to do. And my wife, who I've been with for 13 years, said, you should go ahead and try being a pharmaceutical rep, because you would do so well. You explain things simply to people that don't really have the verbiage. And I said, I'm not doing that. I love the financial services. She says, you really should try it. So as a smart man, I listened to my wife, and I did. And here I am 3 years later, senior territory manager with Eli Lilly in the cardiometabolic area. Basically, the medications that I represent are Manjaro and Zepbound, both essentially the same medication, but two different indications, two different marketing systems, so to speak, and two different conversations. So that's me in a very, very elongated nutshell.
That's awesome. That's quite the journey, I will say. But so many different industries, so many different areas, but still within sales. So I think I'm going to skip to a question just because I think I want to touch on that diversity. So
Sure.
with that experience, then for someone who's maybe exploring this idea of like maybe making that jump to sales, how would they decide what industry or what pathway to go, right? Whether it's financial advising or, to your point, right, pharmaceutical, and there's a whole number, right? There's tech sales, there's so many different kinds of sales. Like, how would one decide where to go?
I do love that question, because one of the reasons I've followed the journey I have is because I've always believed in what benefit I could bring a product, a service, and the people that it's meant for. Um, I can tell you with all honesty that Eli Lilly, one of the reasons it attracted me was I've been a diabetic since I was 40 years old, and probably diagnosed later than I should have. I should have probably been diagnosed a lot earlier, but in coming into this, it was one of those things that I was passionate about. My grandmother on my mother's side and on my father's side both passed away from complications of diabetes. My grandfather was a diabetic until he was 92. He passed. And my father currently is a absolutely uncontrolled diabetic. So it hits very close to home for me. And I believe in what I do. And being one's genuine self goes so far in anything that we do, right?
Mhm.
And this is the dad speaking, right? Um, but being able to go ahead and represent something that you believe in, you believe that it's going to go ahead and provide a benefit, a service, um, it's going to change somebody's life, really does make the difference in the conversation being genuine and real, and
Mhm.
being able to go ahead and speak from the heart. People notice that. I hope that you guys can pick up on that with this. For me, financial services, I grew up in a place where half of my friends ended up in jail. And it took this much for me to go ahead and go down that road. And I decided to go a different route. Um, for me, it was being able to go ahead and teach people that things that my father and my mother never learned about their finances. I saw them fight
Mhm.
for money for years. And being able to go ahead and take somebody who's a teacher and starting out, being able to teach them that these are some of the things they can do so they can retire at 55 instead of at 65, was something that was near and dear to my heart. I saw friends of mine that lost their fathers at the age of, their father was 32 and they were 18. Um, I'm sorry, they were 14. And anyway, very young. And then the parents did not have the means uh, to continue. So they had to move out of their house. So that for me, insurance was a no-brainer at the time.
Mhm.
I can't say that Gap was the case or the cars because I wasn't really passionate about those things, but that's when I realized that I had to be passionate
Yeah,
because if not, there's no point. So
yeah, absolutely. That
hopefully
is
that
really,
answered your question. Find
yeah,
something you're
absolutely.
passionate about. Find something that you can believe in, because if you can believe it, other people will join you.
That is such good advice, definitely. Um, so then for our next question, what sort of misconceptions do people usually have about working in sales? And how would you address some of those?
I'll start with the fact that if you notice, I do not have a sharkskin suit on. I I'm not a used car salesman. I may speak like one sometimes, but the misconception of sales being this sleazy backroads way of going ahead and getting people to do what you want them to do is not the case at all. There are methodologies. Um, some of you might have already gone through some of the like hierarchy of needs. You might have gone through some sales training yourself in other jobs. I can tell you that there is an entire science behind it, and it has nothing to do with trying to convince people of doing something they don't want to do. It's more about being able to identify needs, being able to go ahead and present solutions to those needs. So that's the first misconception. The second one is that it's easy. I wish I could say that that was the case because I'd make a lot more money with a lot less work. Um, it is time consuming. There is research to be done. There is information to be learned because in the same manner that you believe in the information that you're presenting, you have to know what you're talking about. And in the insurance side, it had to do with little nuances of who gets covered when and how and why. And on the financial services, there's countless things that you can and cannot talk about. I went through, let's see, 4 licenses, including the life insurance one, to be able to even speak to customers. And those licenses each took 2 months to go ahead and study for. To this day, I can't jump on social media and speak because I still have my license valid. There's so many things that we can and cannot say. Um, if I didn't have my license, I could tell you what stocks to go ahead and go after, but I still do, and this is being recorded. I can't even say it because of that. So, but definitely understanding that there's a lot to learn and that you never stop learning in this job. One of the things I was mentioning to Azra just a minute ago was um, one of the medications that we just had approved for a different indication. Well, that's different indication. It has an entire vocabulary, an entire medical field of study that needs to be learned and understood to be able to speak to these people because it's the first time any medication has gone into this realm. Um, so it's fascinating. It's exhausting. We just came in February from a meeting in which about 1,800 of us were stuck in a basement in a hotel in Chicago learning about obstructive sleep apnea. You think that your classes right now put you to sleep? Trust me, obstructive sleep apnea will bore you to death. But it's important for us to know so that we can speak to customers and be able to know what we're talking about. So yeah, I think I kind of jumped around there, but
Yeah.
put me back on track if we need to. I'm
No, no, those were all excellent
still
points. And
haven't had
when
my
you,
afternoon cup of coffee.
yeah, when you mentioned that like sleazy, I always think of like Matilda, the movie, and maybe I'm aging myself here, but the dad. And it's definitely not that. Absolutely. So I so appreciate you sharing that. Um, Sort of going along the lines with the success here, which you mentioned, what sort of qualities or skill sets do you think are really essential in order to be successful in sales?
Ooh, oh, okay. So I'm going to tell you what made me successful, and then I'm going to go ahead and mention to you that I have counterparts that have none of these qualities and are still successful.
Mhm.
For me, I've always had a knack of being able to go ahead and have a conversation with somebody and have them open up to me. I've always been able to go ahead and start off a conversation by being vulnerable and then allowing others to be vulnerable with me. So I've never led a conversation in sales or otherwise where it's about me. It's always about the other person. I've also been able to go ahead and understand that even before I took my classes with WGU, that there is something that everybody's trying to achieve, accomplish, or avoid. And that for me has always been key, even when I was selling clothes. Um, I always had a knack to be able to go ahead and kind of identify those things that that person really, really wanted to. I always talk about the car sales side because everybody thinks about it being like wham bam, let's go ahead and do this right now. And I never approached it that way. I was successful by speaking to the person and asking them, what is it they really want to go ahead and do today? Because they may just be looking for information. I said, that's fine. We'll talk in 2 weeks and see if that's still the case. And they would come back. So that's, again, what has
Mhm.
made me successful. Being prepared, being able to go ahead and ask those questions, and being able to have honest conversations about what the needs are.
Mhm.
I have other people that are excellent at the medical side. For example, currently in Eli Lilly, that are excellent on the medical side. They know the stuff front to back, and they do very, very well with those people, but they don't have that request for more information, that ability to ask a question that's going to go ahead and pull more information out. They're still very successful, and that is their strength. So when you ask me what things would be, in all honesty, you will find your own way of being successful as long as it's something that you enjoy, that you can speak to from the heart. I think that skill sets abound. I know plenty of people that are great at teaching, um, and that's how they approach their sales. They teach what they're trying to sell. Financial services was a great example. It was an excellent way to go ahead and have people open up to you, was teaching them how these different tools worked. And they did very, very well. If you asked them to sell a car, they would absolutely end up hungry. They would never make a dime. But these are people that did very well in that area because they were
Mhm.
great teachers. So
Yeah,
that's my 2 cents on that. Yeah.
that's great. And I think that's a great way to talk about how there's so many different skill sets that are so transferable from one industry to another. So that's
And
fantastic.
I'm glad you did mention that because that was actually something when we talked originally. That is definitely something I do want to go ahead and mention. I think somebody here in the chat also asked
Mhm.
about um, needing a medical background.
Mhm.
If you haven't noticed already, I have no medical background whatsoever. Um, when I came to Eli Lilly, the original conversation that I had to join the company, I didn't even know what we were selling. But I knew that in conversing with family, friends that were in the medical field, that there was a need for information that may not come from the internet, or it may not come from the people that they're talking to currently, because those people are looking to sell them something. So for me, the conversations I had with the people who hired me was, I've sold air where people sign for it and they buy it. And I've sold actual, like something that you put gas in. So I've sold a little bit of everything. One of the things that never changed was the relationship I built, the conversations I had, and the needs that were met. And if you can remember that,
Mhm.
whatever background you currently have, medical background will definitely help, there's no doubt, because you can understand a lot of the things, but you can learn it. Just like you learned business, just like you learned science when you were in high school. You may or may not use it ever again, but here we are. So yes, definitely remember that all skills are transferable. If you're selling insurance, that information can be transferable into financial services, cars, retail, doesn't matter. It's just a skill.
Awesome, great, fantastic, and way to get in that question. um, so I know you mentioned sales is challenging, right? I mean, it's definitely not an easy job, as most people think. So, how do you stay motivated, especially if you're like hitting a slump, or you're not getting the responses, or you're not getting the meetings, or like, how do you continue to stay motivated when things get tough?
For me, it's remembering my why. For me, it's the stories that I've heard of from people that their diabetes was completely, and I say reverse, they're always going to be diabetic, but hearing their blood sugars come down and stay down when I go into an office, those good stories, the good outcomes
Mhm.
is what continues to allow me to say I'm doing what I'm supposed to. Um, I can tell you that even in the automotive industry, when I was doing training, for example, it was hearing somebody who had not sold more than 5 cars over a month go and 2 months after we've had a discussion and gone through training, they're selling 15, 20 cars. So good outcomes for me always was my motivator. And remembering that I do it because somebody's life, at least one person, I can change their life today if I actually do my job. So
Nice.
that's how I stay motivated. No
I
matter
like
how
that.
much of the paperwork comes through that I absolutely despise, no matter how many expense reports come through, um, how many questions I get about the same thing that I repeated 15 times, it doesn't matter. Because if that question does change that one person's life today, I did what I was supposed to. And yes, I'm aging myself with that, definitely.
No, no, it's fantastic advice. Um, and then I think for the next question, I'm gonna actually take Sarah's here from the chat, just because it's on topic. Could you describe a typical day in your job, or maybe week?
Oh yeah,
What does that look like?
absolutely. Well, I can tell you about today. So in my industry, we do maintain samples. So the first thing I did got samples. I'm actually here currently in the storage unit where we store them. Um, we get a nice little office here, which is nice. Um, but most of the time I'm on the road. So any other meetings that I take from my company, I'm doing in my car. So I have a little iPad, I set it up, and that's what I do. But my morning consisted of picking up my samples and then going into 5 or 6 different offices and having directed conversations. If I may add one more piece of advice,
Mhm.
I don't know what the current curricula is for business, but if you haven't started going into AI, get into it as soon as possible, because even this old dog is having to use AI right now to identify targets and people that I should go see that I haven't seen and things of that nature. So it's coming, guys. It is. Um, so for me, it's having directed conversations specific to previous conversations I've had before. So that recall that conversation that I might have had with a staff member, and being able to go ahead and say, hey, we talked about this last time, how'd it go? Or tell me a little bit about that patient that we talked about. What was different about them that made you think of this drug versus the other? Um, and then being able to go ahead and formulate questions that bring forward the reasons that they may not have used our drug in the past. And then presenting reasons why they should and move on to the next office. Leave some samples if that's something that they are able to do and continue to move through. I have a lunch usually scheduled every day of the week at somebody's office. Um, it's not like it used to be where pharmaceutical reps, if you ever seen the movies about pharmaceutical reps where they can just go willy-nilly and spend money on people, that's not the case anymore. Um, it is all highly regulated. We have to get signatures from everybody that attends. In particular, the doctors and providers, that gets reported to the government. Um, so it's called the Sunshine Act. Look it up. But yeah, and that's continues in the afternoon. So I usually see anywhere from 8 to 10 offices a day, um, and then go into doing some of my administrative work, which is expense reports and mileage reporting and things of that nature. Um, and then prepare for the next day, taking a look at the people that I have scheduled to see that next day and making sure that I have questions top of mind that can move that conversation forward. Because especially in this industry, it's not about what they do today, it's about what they do from now on that you're measured. So
Very
hopefully
cool.
that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Thank you. Um,
And Sarah, there is no playing golf, there is no taking them out for dinners, just nothing like that. That doesn't exist anymore. At least not with the companies that maintain ethical standards. So,
good, good to know. Let's see here. So along that sort of route, are there particular habits or resources that have been instrumental in your success? Um, I know you mentioned AI, and I don't know if you wanted to expand on that because I've seen some of those tools myself, which is pretty interesting. So, any habits or sort of resources that you definitely lean into?
well, we had an old saying back in the retail days: inspect what you expect. So one of the things that we're measured on is how many people we get to see and what impact we have. But you're not going to know that unless you're actually keeping track. So
Mhm,
you'll use AI. I do this basically from a picture. You use the AI to go ahead and create a little spreadsheet, and it goes ahead and populates all the names and how many times I'm supposed to see them. And I go ahead and go through and take the addresses and say, let's build a routing based on this so that I spend less time in the car and more time in front of people. So that gives you a good idea of how that's going. On the other side, so the corporate side, they're using AI to decide what those conversations are based on interactions that I don't even get to see. Um, what they do on the internet, what they do at EMR level. I mean, there's tons of information out there that we're not privy to, but it compiles all of it and spits out
mhm.
information that we should know. So yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, very neat.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
other than that, I would say sticking to some basics. I
mhm,
think I mentioned earlier, these conversations that I decide to have and questions that I decide to ask, I still go back to those standard needs, the hierarchy of needs, and the thought that somebody in that office may have something that needs to be resolved. They want to
mhm,
accomplish something, and it might be an office manager that wants to go ahead and get the percentage of people that are controlled on their diabetes down. It might be an MA that doesn't want to do prior authorizations anymore. An MA is a medical assistant, by the way.
mhm,
Um, Somebody needs some sort of resolution. And it's not just the doctors, it's not just the nurse practitioners or the physician assistants. If you can change a perception of somebody in that office, it can have an effect on the entire office. So remembering that and making sure that you're addressing all of it is definitely something. And I use that to this day. I still have that conversation when I do guest trainings for the new classes that come in. I always bring it up. It's like, this is a very basic way of looking at what we do is
Mhm.
somebody has a need. You have ways of fulfilling that need. You just got to find the right one that not only addresses it, but also speaks to them directly.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's just a hi.
Yeah. And so with that, along that same sort of thought, so we have a question in the chat around the idea of being successful in sales tied to being extroverted and this idea of being really good at small talk. But you're saying that that authenticity really comes from really knowing who you're talking to, right? And I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit more, but this sort of, I think I would call it a misconception that you have to be extroverted to be good in sales.
This was Corey, is that right?
Yes, Corey. Yep.
So Corey, I'm going to answer you directly. No. Um, oh, I'm sorry. The actual question was, is there any chance of being successful?
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. What I would tell you is this: the extroversion and that ease of small talk comes from, and I'm going to be completely blunt. I care about the people I talk to. I'll give you a great example. I just came from a lunch at an office. The head MA in that location, she is 5 months pregnant. I know it's a boy. I know she had some difficulty in the first couple of weeks with morning sickness, and I know that his name is James when he's born. That comes because I care. I'm a grandpa myself. She's 2 years old now. I absolutely love her. I love hearing the word abuelo. I absolutely love this. Um, but I care about that person, and she knows that. So I come around 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. That's not small talk. I want to know, hey, how are you feeling today? And it might be that only question that I ask, but she knows that. She knows that I care. And it goes beyond me having to ask her about, hey, how many scripts went through or anything. If you truly enjoy what you do, extroverted, introverted, can't do the small talk, love doing the small talk, it's not going to matter if you're not genuine about it. I genuinely care about that person. And I look forward to seeing the baby pictures when they come out. Um, if I wasn't that way, and I can tell you, I know hundreds of salespeople, whether people that I've trained, people that I've worked with, which absolutely could not give two pennies for any of the people that they talked to or sold to. And they stayed doing what they're doing and ended up flaming out because there's no way of having success if you can't be genuine. And everybody that I've known that's been successful at this, they have a genuine care for who they speak to. So I hope that does answer your question. There is an opportunity out there as long as you can be genuine with your intentions.
Absolutely. All right, so I have one more question and then we'll go back into the chat for the additional questions in there. So if you guys have more, think of more questions, please do. So what, and I know you've given us lots of good advice, but what advice would you give to students who are considering a career in sales? So maybe they're starting out, um, and maybe teetering on the edge, but what sort of advice would you give for those kind of starting out, either transitioning or they're fresh and considering sales as a career path?
Well, I'll kind of put this into two parts. I would say for those of you who have never sold, don't underestimate what you've done already. Your experience, whether it was in high school, college, trying to get somebody to go ahead and see your point of view, you've sold. We had an old adage, I'm not sure how you say that in English, but there's basically no saying that came from, oh God, what was that guy's name? He used to do horrendous sales training. It was like the most cheesy sales training you could have possibly thought of. Grant Cardone actually was his name. Um, but one of the things about what he used to say was, you're always closing. Somebody's closing somebody. So somebody's always selling. Either you're getting sold or you're the one doing the selling. A raise that you asked for, somebody's selling and somebody's not. that spouse conversation about where you're going to go to eat. Somebody's selling, I promise you. So you know how to sell. You just haven't been trained to do it yet. So don't sell yourself short, literally. Um, and for those who are transitioning, look, I come from that same era where salespeople were used car salesmen. We're not anymore. It is such an advanced area now where the specialization and the level of knowledge that you have to even compete with other people who are doing the same work is astronomically higher than it was 20 years ago. So understand that the challenge is there, the opportunity's there, and let's be honest, money isn't that bad either. Um, but without a doubt, the fulfillment is there. That was something that I used to remember. I remember hearing is like you're just selling for the sake of selling. I don't experience that at all. Every day I hear a good story about somebody who lost 40, 50, 60 pounds, or their A1C is controlled and now they can go and do a workout without having to worry about the sugars getting too low. Anything like that means that I've done my job and I love it every single day. Yeah, the only time the smile goes away is when I'm actually at home and I'm like, okay, day's over. So,
Fantastic. Great advice. Um, and so I'm going to go to a question in the chat touching on the aspect of money, because you did mention that. So,
yes.
typically sales, there's some sort of, maybe there's a base, right? Or it's 100% commission, but usually some sort of base and then a commission on top of that. And so the question is from Derek, if you are on a 50-50 split, so base commission, how do you adjust your finances so that you could live off of your base, right? For those maybe months or weeks where it doesn't go so well. So kind of
Ooh.
picking on your financial advising hat here. How do you manage that? How do you like personally plan when the full amount isn't guaranteed?
Well, just in case my licenses are still active, I'm going to go ahead and preface this with this is not financial advice in any way, shape, or form. I am not affiliated with any firm, or nor am I receiving any money for the advice I'm about to give. With that being said, you mentioned the 50-50 split, right? The base
Mhm.
is what comes in regardless. If you can't live on that, you're living too high on that horse. So you should be able to go ahead and live within that 50%. And if you can't, you need to adjust some stuff or you need to find something else. The commission should be something that you don't count on because you don't know how it's going to be. Trust me, somebody who was going through commissions based sales during COVID, there is a possibility that you get nothing of it. So thankfully, in Bank of America, they transitioned us all to a salary, because if not, I wouldn't have survived. So to give you a good idea, if you can't live on that 50%, you need to find a way to. Now, that being said, the commissions can start being regular once you have a good feel for your industry. But until then, yeah, that would be my advice. Live on the 50 and everything else is gravy.
Good, good advice. All right. Hopefully, Derek, that answered your question. Um, let's see. Yeah, there was another question I missed earlier. Oh, okay, Dora. Dora, I don't know if you feel comfortable coming off of mute. If not, I'll read. But if you do wanted to kind of share your own story, you are more than welcome to.
Sure, thank you for that. And thank
Yeah.
you, Guillermo. This is very enlightening. Like you, and like I said on that text, I started as a toddler. I did have to, out of necessity, like personal stuff, have to relocate to Austin. So had a hard time, and I knew that because the market was not as robust as in California, especially academics. It's boomed a lot in the last probably 8 years or so, but not at the time
Mhm.
in 2006 when I relocated. So I did do some teaching I do have a subspecialization as an undergrad in cancer information management, and that's because I did do a lot of interventional cardiology and pretty much a lot of
Nice.
hardcore oncology. So I do come with the passion and knowledge. I have kept up with all of the regulatory stuff with the FDA, especially during the COVID. But I just can't get through any recruiter, nothing. You submit something, you never get a response. So in the interim, I did get a response from one headhunter, and her feedback to me was, well, you haven't had recent experience. And I said, I do keep up. Regulatory affairs, you have to keep up. And you mentioned the
Of course.
Sunshine Act. So in sales, you also have to keep up with the regulatory aspect. So, but I
Of
can't seem
course.
to even get to the conversation with any of the recruiters. So that's been my dilemma. So I decided, because I'm a natural learner, I decided, well, let me go into the IT, because you touched in on AI. And so that's the difficulty, I know, because for a while, I did keep in touch with, even, they're from the marketing side, the sales side. And they had a hard time transitioning to the tools, the electronic tools necessary. But I come from health information management, where we're hardcore IT. So this is why I'm specializing in the cybersecurity aspect, because of the regulations under HIPAA that also cross over into clinical research and everything else that goes into pharmaceutical and biotech.
Oh yeah.
So that's where I stand, Guillermo, basically.
Fantastic. So, okay, so advice I would give,
Hmm.
and again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form somebody who is knowledgeable on this aspect in terms of how the networking would work.
Hmm.
But you mentioned staying up to speed. I would start looking for some of those headhunters, like you mentioned, that one person, and
Hmm.
take a look at their network, and then start posting about the things that you're keeping up with. It might be something that catches their attention, and then you mention the fact that, hey, there's a job within your network that's actually coming up. What would you advise? I am not the person to like talk about that strategy. I
Hmm.
promise you, I am poor in that area. I don't have enough knowledge to advise too much about it.
Hmm.
But I would say that just in keeping up and being able to post about it and be able to have conversations um, with the people that may have connections within the industry would definitely be a good start. Um, if I'm being completely honest, I posted for a job, and what I did was I took all of my experience in insurance and financial services and spoke to, like, I associated the skills that I brought forward
Hmm.
to what they were asking for within pharma. So
Correct.
I specifically said, I don't do this, but I've done this that equates.
Hmm.
And it was a
Yes.
cover letter that actually got me noticed.
Yeah,
It
it's
wasn't my actual resume.
the translational aspect of the skills is what you're talking about. Just like we do in clinical
Exactly.
research
Transference.
and
Yep.
development. Yeah, it's translational. Yeah. So we do have translational research for that. I have done those things. The thing is, speaking of AI, which is a marvelous thing, but it can also be a detrimental in my case, because some of your information, if you post things, it gets filtered. And even though I hit the keywords, for example, they'll post something that says familiarity with GCPs. Well, yes, that's such a subjective question, because it shouldn't be familiarity with GCP. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's the good clinical practices, and that's the global ethical principles, which the FDA does recognize, but we have the Code of Federal Regulations, and those are
Yes.
enforceable by law. And so even though we have to be robust in GCP, which is the Belmont Report, the ethical principles in research, uh, familiarity is not the wording that you want to use. But yes, I will respond, yes, I am familiar. You have to have
Yeah.
mastery of those things in anything that is the pharmaceutical industry. And this is why you see cases where we can't talk about translational. We can't take the data from, let's say, Nigeria into the United States, even though the clinical trial is conducted there for this reason. So you're not going to be able to market your drugs, because it's never going to get to market here in the United States. So it's having those conversations with some of the recruiters, to be honest with you, are not robust in their knowledge.
No,
And
they're not.
even, yeah, and even though like I said, I've kept up, I am a certified coder in medicine and medical reimbursement specialist. So I keep adding. just because the skill is so broad. But yet I did get one disconcerting feedback, and that was, which I've never heard before. And I kind of chuckled a little and asked her, I'll tell you exactly what I said to her. I'll be transparent. Her feedback was, well, you're just so overly educated. I've never heard that before. I actually laughed and I said, well, let me ask you this. If you were going in for some sort of cardiovascular surgery, would you want the overeducated anesthesiologist and heart surgeon or the undereducated one? She said, well, that's different. I said, no, because in pharmaceuticals, anything pharmaceutical research and development, once that drug or device hits the population, this is where you see now the travesty of the adverse events that can potentially kill somebody. So, but I've
That's a
gotten
new
that,
one.
yeah, I've gotten that kind of
I've
feedback,
heard
which is
over
very
like
depressing.
overqualified, but not overeducated. That's a
Yeah,
first.
and I've heard overqualified
I'm
too.
sorry
And
you're going through that. That's
so I've asked, what exactly when you say familiarity to the Code of Federal Regulations, like 21 CFR 50? And she said, so I asked her honestly, do you know what that is? And she said,
I have no
no. And
idea.
I said, but you're recruiting for that. So,
Yeah,
so it kind of becomes a little bit funny. You have to laugh though. I'm happy to have that, disposition to actually laugh. But I fear for newcomers, and I mean new, people trying to get into the industry where they're not going to have that opportunity because the recruiters are not really. I even joined SHRM, just so you know, if you don't know who that is, that's a
Mhm.
society for
HR.
yeah, HR, yeah, and I became certified. I passed the exam, and I don't have a degree in HR management, but I did have conversations with them saying, you're doing a disservice to a pool of people, whether they're newly coming into the industry or seasoned people who keep up, where you're not really asking the right questions. And I've had to be in a position where I did get hired and did a temporary job managing a animal hospital, where I actually had conversations with the reps coming in for the drugs. And they said, I didn't know you had a veterinary background. I don't. I just had to learn the veterinary aspects, but the drug development, yes, I do have. So, it's those kinds of conversations where you're correct when you say you translate those and you transfer those skills
Yeah.
and you learn something new. But it seems I can't tap into the biotech and pharma. That's
Yeah.
it.
I can, and I can jump in here
I,
too, Guillermo. Sorry.
yes.
Just from our career and professional development perspective. So, as a student and as an alum, you do have access to our services. And so, Doris, this is something you might consider doing. But I put our website in the chat. And when you get on our website, there's a big like request appointment. I do encourage you to meet with a career advisor that can maybe help translate some of your skills, or even organize your resume, because there's different ways you can organize your
Correct.
resume,
Hmm.
especially if you might have some time gaps or gaps in your experience if you took some time out of the workforce. And so they can help with some of that. Same with using AI to help write. If you're doing that, great time saver, but you do have to be cautious with that um,
Hmm.
there as well. And then also with the networking piece too. And Guillermo, feel free to jump into this, but I think the networking piece is really big. I mean, yes, we can submit all of the applications, but I think as the labor market gets tighter and tighter, with all of the things that are happening in the world today, building your network and reaching out to people and connecting with people is going to be more important to get kind of your
Correct.
foot in the door.
Yeah, correct. And I actually have, and I found a file, and I had over 100 business cards just from sales reps. But unfortunately, people move, and pharmaceutical companies are notorious for merging with others, being taken over by others. So yes, the networking part,
I
yes, is
lost my
very
partner.
critical. But I
I
did,
lost my partner in a reorganization
yes,
in December. So yeah.
yes. And just a little bit for you, is it Azra? Is that how you pronounce
Mhm.
your name?
Yep.
Hasovic?
Mhm.
Azra,
Yep.
just as a side note, and especially if you have, let's call us mature students and employees on this webinar,
Mhm.
because I do read labor laws and all that stuff as well. Just HCA, and I targeted HCA because I know that they have some sort of preferential to hire people or look at applications from people from WGU. I saw somewhere that that was marketed. Like they'll say, oh yeah, we take, they encourage hiring people from students from WGU. So anywho, I applied, but one thing that caught my eye was that they do this behavioral assessment. And I've done so many of those. But this is the
Mhm.
first time from HCA, which is, it's a huge management entity for hospitals, and they own hospitals too. But you have to disclose your year of birth in order to proceed with the assessment, which is unheard of. So I went researching it. Of course I did. I'm a researcher at heart. And that's a no-no. So just for your older students and stuff, be aware of those things, because I think it's their way of filtering out older candidates, because there's no rhyme or reason for a behavioral assessment for you to have to disclose your age. But the application itself, it just asks you if you're over 18, which is
Mhm.
correct, because under the federal law,
Mhm.
they would be in violation of that. So those are things that I notice, and I do talk to younger people. When I used to teach, I would give them the heads up just so that they would be aware to look at everything that's being asked of you, because they're somehow wiggling. And I've never, for every position I've applied, from administrative to all of that at HCA, I've never gotten a call. So that's an interesting, just FYI for you students listening. Just be on the
Thank
lookout and make the connection of what the intent of that is. But
Yes.
anywho, but
Yes,
yet
you
yours,
do have to be vigilant.
vigilant.
Now I can't
Yes,
talk
vigilant,
in your
because yeah,
job search.
there's no
Thank
rhyme.
you.
And I even have people that are friends that are in behavioral health, and they said there's no justification because the age should not be an issue for behavioral assessments. So that's
Yeah,
an interesting, just for you guys, if you're helping people being recruited and stuff, or
yep,
guiding students into the employment industry. Yeah. But anyway,
absolutely.
yeah, very robust, and congratulations to you, Guillermo. Very impressive.
Oh,
There's always a
thank
way,
you.
yes, to climb that, and you worked hard. That is very evident in your discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you. All right, so we have just a few more minutes left, and I wanted just to see if anyone else has any other questions about sales, pharmaceutical sales, any of the topics that we hit on today. Um, and I will stop talking. And if I missed anything too, I'm going back through the chat just to double check.
And please don't be shy, even if you're introverted and don't like small talk. Please ask the question if you do have it, because somebody else might have it. Happy to answer it.
And I think while we're waiting, Guillermo, can I touch on one aspect of sales too that I think sometimes gets a bad
Sure.
rap, but that cold calling or that cold outreach. How do you deal with that? Any advice?
Well, um, I'm gonna tell a joke I tell a lot of people. Again, because I'm a dad and dad jokes are my thing. But it's kind of like dating in high school. Um, Basically, it's a numbers game. So you call as many people as you can, and somebody's going to say yes eventually. Um, that being said, I would say that when you look at cold calling, it is the toughest part of sales. There's no doubt. Um, Emails, you really do have to go ahead and have a great way of capturing attention, because, I mean, I'm a nobody, so to speak, and I get 35, 40 emails soliciting things from me every day. I delete most of them. So you have to have very thick skin. There's going to be people hanging up on you, and just remembering that if you can change one person's life in one way or another, then it'll be worth it. But
Mhm.
especially for the cold calling, you have got to believe in what you're doing, because if you don't, it gets really boring really quick. So I would say that's my best advice: is make sure that it is one of those things that you want to do. And I can tell you this from the financial services side. That's how you start in the financial services side, is cold calling. Um, and it can be a lonely, lonely time, but it's having that one or two people that actually pick up the phone you have a conversation with, you go ahead and actually receive some glimpse of something that you may be able to help them with, and you get it done. And then all of a sudden you're getting 2 calls from friends of theirs about how well you did. And this person mentioned you to me, and
Mhm.
it becomes worth it. So that would be my
And
advice. Love
no,
it,
that's
because
great.
it's rough.
That's great. And then another question here on, do you have any advice on finding sales adjacent roles while trying to make that transition to sales?
Ooh. Um, I have actually seen a lot of this where you have, it's not necessarily appointment making, but it's like a sales operations role. So especially somebody who's never had a sales role before, being able to kind of support with data sets and information about a client or anything like that. That would be a great way to take a look at the skills that you currently have, and sales enablement. There is the word for
Mhm.
it. Yes, sales enablement would be a great way to go ahead and speak to that. Um, the companies that I worked for, and one of them is a company called Cision in the past. Again, you have to love what you do. That was not one of those moments, but definitely it was a learning experience, because sales enablement was something that I did not know existed until I started in that role. And it was a great way to go ahead and look at solutions for a much more robust client, instead of just saying there's something transactional I can offer you. That sales enablement role definitely went ahead and pulled in a lot of information that helped bring such a profound level of knowledge about the client, about their needs, and what we could do to go ahead and help them. So if you do have a background in research, you have a background in operations in any way, this would be a great way to go ahead and kind of get into the sales side without actually doing the selling.
Great. Fantastic.
Graphic design. Graphic design is a tough one. My father was a graphic designer. Um, yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know how to tell you much more than that. But keep in mind, for those of you that don't know, there used to be newspapers, and my dad was the one that used to go ahead and do the graphics for like furniture stores. He used to draw out the actual picture. So that's the graphic design he did. So that's 40 years ago.
Yeah. But, I mean, going back to our initial conversation, though, about transferable skills, I mean, with graphic design, there's definitely a need to listen, right, to what your
Oh
client
yeah.
wants and obviously delivering on that. But I think if you can, right, going back to that resume, right, reword those bullet points to really highlight those skill sets, that I think are essential in sales. And I think as much as there's talking, there's definitely listening and getting to know who that person is. To
Absolutely.
your point, Guillermo.
And I'm Miss Spalding. I'm gonna butcher it. Kasia, am I saying that correctly? Keisha. So Keisha, here's what I would tell you. To Azra's point, you actually probably have had some projects in which you've gone ahead and delivered for a client. You had a vision. This is what you wanted to do for the client as they asked for it, and they said yes to it. Congratulations, you just sold something. Sometimes it's as simple as that.
Mhm.
So
Fantastic. All right. Well, I know we are at time and I want to be respectful of that. So thank you again so much, Guillermo, for spending your afternoon with us, for sharing all of that wonderful advice and really giving us an inside sort of scoop into sales and what that looks like. I think it's really helpful. I don't know. I love learning about careers. It's probably why I'm doing what I'm doing.
exactly.
But I think it's really fantastic because I think to your point, there's so many wonderful things you can do, especially if you're passionate about that product or that solution. So thank you again so much. And thank you everyone for being
My
on the
pleasure.
call with us today. I do have a quick survey link that I'm going to send out via email. If you guys can take a minute and complete it, it is 2 questions, I promise, that would really help our team in doing our job. So thank you again, everyone. And yeah, have a good rest of your afternoon or evening if you're on East Coast.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Great questions.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.